Welcome to Module 1, Section 3 of Algebra 2. We are going to talk about interval notation in this section. And interval notation is all centered around the concept of inequalities. An inequality is a relation between two expressions that aren't equal. So let's get that down. A relation between two expressions that aren't equal. And you have four possibilities for these inequalities. So somewhere on your page, I would write down we've got greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. So again, this is greater than, this is less than. So sometimes in mathematics it's necessary to talk about a large group of numbers, and it becomes impossible to list them all. When this occurs, we use a notation called interval notation. So interval notation is a shorthand way of writing an inequality. And with interval notation, we're going to use brackets. Let me write this over here. Brackets and parentheses. You're going to see a lot of brackets and parentheses. So what I have coming up next is three columns. One, I give you the set notation. So this is the inequality. X is greater than or equal to A. A can be any number. A could be 4, A could be 100, A could be 0, A could be -1, whatever. So X is greater than or equal to A. On a number line, that looks like this. So here's an empty number line. Let's fill this in. If this is 0, maybe we'll put A here. If it's greater than or equal to A, that means it's A. We include A, so we're going to have a closed dot or closed point on A, and anything to the right of it is a solution. And because we're including A and it's everything to the right, this is interval notation. It's whatever number A is, comma, infinity. That's the infinity sign. You notice we have a closed bracket because we included A. That's why it's closed bracket. We have an open bracket with the infinity at all times. So let's go to the next one. Our inequality is X is greater than A. For that, again, I'll pick an A somewhere up here. It's going to be very similar, but we don't want to include this A value. Everything to the right is a solution on this number line. Anything to the right of A. So here's the interval notation for that one. A is the lowest point, all the way up to infinity. Open parenthesis beside the infinity, as always. But you notice this is what changed. Because we're not including A, it has to be only greater than it. It's going to be an open parenthesis this time. So if we kind of go back to what we started up here, the closed parenthesis, think of as include those numbers. So if you need to include that number, it's closed. Open, don't include these numbers. So let's quickly run through these next two. Our inequality, X is less than or equal to A. Number line, 0, we'll pick an A up here. Less than or equal to means include. Anything less than means let's go negative. Here's our inequality. This time, reading left to right, all the negative numbers come up and it ends at A. So we're going to say negative infinity starts open parenthesis around that, ends at A, close parenthesis because A is included. And our final one, x is less than A, 0, A, open parenthesis at A, or open circle, excuse me, and anything less than. And then here's our interval notation. You notice it's the same, we just have the parenthesis around A because we're not including it. So now instead of variables, let's actually use numbers here. Instead of A, our first example is a set notation of x when x is greater than 2. And the directions say, find the numbers on a graph, write it in interval notation. So we'll use the number line as our graph. I like to always label 0. 2 is somewhere up here. If it's greater than 2, open circle at 2. Anything greater than is a solution. Interval notation. Well, it goes from 2 is the starting point of the number line, all the way up to infinity, always at an open parenthesis at infinity. 2 is also a parenthesis because we're not including it. For the next one, we have x is less than or equal to negative 5. Let's say this is negative 5 down here. Less than or equal to means include negative 5. Anything left is a solution. Our interval notation, this time, all the negative numbers come first. So negative infinity, always with a parenthesis. It ends at negative 5. That's the highest point in the solution set. Bracket, because we're including negative 5. Next, we're going to look at interval notation between two different numbers. So maybe between 1 and 2, or between 0 and 100. So between two different numbers. Again, I'm just using examples of A and B. So general variables. B can be any number, A can be any number. So our first example is x is greater than or equal to B, but less than or equal to A. You could also think of that as x is between A and B, but can also equal A and B. You notice x is right in the middle of that. So if this is 0, maybe A is up here and B is down here. So we know these are both equal to as well. Closed circle, and it's anything between them, since x is in between the two numbers. So it's just these solutions between them. Here, in interval notation, you notice the lowest point is B, and we include it, so there's a square bracket. And the highest point is A, and we include that, there's a square bracket. So there's no infinities involved here when we're shoved between two numbers. For our next one, we have, let me show you that. X is between A and B, but it's not including A and B on this case. So I'm going to put B down here again, A up here. Open circles, because they're not including anything between. Very similar interval notation, just parentheses, but because we're not including A or B. This is just a combination of it. We are including B, not including A, if you notice those inequality symbols. So we're just going to make that adjustment. Whoops. B and A. Closed at B because it's included. Open at A because it's not. And then you notice under interval notation, B has a bracket, A has a parenthesis. Last one, other way around. 0, A, and there's B. A is closed this time. B is the smallest one. It's open. Anything in between, just flipped with the parenthesis in the bracket in the interval notation. Okay, now let's do some examples with different values rather than A and B. Our first one, we define x to be between negative 5 and 2, but can also include 2. Let's write the graph out first. 0, -5, and 2. Don't include -5, include 2, and there we go. Interval notation, -5 is the very lowest point, 2 is the very highest point, -5 has parentheses because it's open, 2 has a bracket because it's closed. Our next example, x is between -7 and 2, not including them. 0, -7, 2. Don't include -7, don't include 2, so open circles, anything in between. That means on our interval notation, there's 2 parentheses. And there we go. Last, let's take what we've done so far and apply it to OR inequalities. In other words, x can be greater than 10, or that value can also be less than or equal to -4. So this isn't an AND where we split it in between two numbers now. It's either greater than one or less than another. On a number line, if I put 0 here, 10, -4, if I do x is greater than 10 first, it's an open circle at 10, greater than means anything to the right. If x is less than or equal to -4, that's going to graph the opposite way. So now you notice it's everything split apart. That means we have to write 2 separate interval notations and combine them with what's called a union. So we're just going to put a U, and that represents the union. And think of that as an OR. So whenever you see an OR, we're going to use that U value over here, just to put it in between. So let me show you what I mean. If I look at this one first, it's -infinity, always with a parenthesis, and then it ends at -4, bracket. This one starts at 10 with a parenthesis, ends at infinity with a parenthesis, and then we just need a union to represent that those two are connected. Okay, last one. X is greater than or equal to 1, or x is less than 0. So we've got 0 and 1. Greater than or equal to 1, let's fill that in to the right. Less than 0, open to the left. Interval notation, we know we need a union because it's an OR. The first one would be -infinity up to 0 with parentheses. The next one would be a square bracket because 1 is included up to infinity. Union between the two.